My friends, tonight I would like to speak to you of the great secret of life, the art of living in the end. Imagination is the true reality. What is conceived inwardly becomes fact outwardly. When we look upon the world with ordinary eyes, it appears as though everything around us has an independent existence, detached from the movements of our inner mind. The buildings, the streets, the conversations, the opportunities, and even the limitations all seem to stand before us as fixed realities that we must adapt to. Yet beneath this common perception lies a deeper truth. The world is not as separate as it appears. It is a mirror, reflecting the collection of our imagination. What one dares to accept and persist in inwardly will inevitably make its way into outward form. For imagination is not a fleeting daydream, but a very substance from which reality is shaped. Consider that every structure in this world, from the simplest chair to the grandest cathedral, was first imagined. Before stone was set or wood was cut, there existed a mental image, a conception in the mind of a man or woman. That mental image, nurtured and believed in, guided the hand and the effort until it stood visible in the outer world. If this principle governs the creation of things, how much more does it govern the creation of circumstances, experiences, and identities? The life you live is but the crystallization of what you have imagined, whether consciously or unconsciously. Imagination is creative power in action. It operates ceaselessly, not only when you deliberately craft a vision, but also when you drift in idle thoughts, fears, and doubts. The conditions of your life are shaped not by chance, but by the states of consciousness you habitually occupy. To imagine lack, struggle, or rejection and then to dwell on it is to invite it into form. To imagine abundance, harmony, and fulfillment, and to persist in that assumption is to summon those experiences into being. The outer follows the inner as the shadow follows the body. It may appear to some that this principle is fanciful, that the hard facts of the world are too stubborn to be altered by imagination. Yet those who test it know otherwise. The outer world is not a cause but an effect. What you perceive as immovable obstacles are but the hardened residues of prior imaginal activity. Change the imaginal seed and you change the fruit. Just as a tree bears according to the seed planted in the soil, life bears according to the ideas planted in imagination. To live with awareness of this principle is to assume responsibility for one's world. No longer can you attribute your circumstances to accident, fate, or the will of others. You understand that the secret theater where life is shaped is within, and that you may enter at any moment, alter the script, and hold fast to the new play until it makes its appearance on the stage of time. This responsibility is both sobering and liberating. Sobering because it removes all excuses, liberating because it grants you mastery over destiny. The question then arises, how does one use imagination deliberately? The answer lies in assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. To imagine effectively is not to idly visualize a scene, but to enter into it with such inward absorption that it feels real, present, and alive. If you desire health, you imagine not the process of recovery, but the state of already being well. If you desire wealth, you do not dwell on lack, but you imagine the freedom, security, and ease that wealth implies. You live inwardly as though it were already so, and by living in this end state, you give it substance and reality. The senses may deny it. The outer world may mock it. But imagination is the deeper law, and persistence in the assumption brings about its fulfillment. Appearances will bend and yield. Circumstances will reshuffle. People will play their roles to support the imaginal act. For the world is but imagination objectified. Notice that you already practice this law, whether knowingly or not. Every fear entertained is an imaginal act. Every expectation, whether bright or grim, is a seed sown. When you fret over a possibility, you are rehearsing its reality. When you rejoice in a dream, you are nurturing its birth. The law is impartial. It delivers the harvest of what you sow. To recognize imagination as reality, to awaken to the power you already wield. The greatest barrier to this realization is the belief in external causes. As long as you regard the world as stronger than your inner state, you will remain bound by it. Yet the moment you accept imagination as the creative cause, you withdraw power from the outer and return it to its rightful place within. You learn to walk by inner vision, not by sight. You begin to test this truth, to revise memories, to construct future scenes, to live nightly in the assumption of your fulfilled desire. And soon the world, obedient as a servant, begins to echo your imaginal acts. Think of imagination as the workshop of God within you. It is not a faculty you merely use. It is the essence of your being. Through imagination, you partake in creation. You partake in visibility, what was once unseen. You transform the invisible into the visible, the intangible into the tangible. To despise imagination is to despise the source of all invention, all progress, all beauty, all growth. To revere it and to discipline it toward noble ends is to align with the deepest truth of existence. Imagination is the true reality, for the outer world is nothing more than its shadow. The invisible governs the visible. The inner state dictates the outer scene. By mastering the direction of imagination, you master life itself. Living in the end, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, as though it were already true. To live in the end is to step beyond the realm of waiting, hoping, or striving and to enter directly into the reality of fulfillment. It is the conscious choice to embody the state of your desire now, rather than regarding it as something distant or yet to be achieved. This principle does not call you to strain or to force the outer world into compliance. Rather, it asks you to accept inwardly that what you desire is already accomplished. You clothe yourself in the feeling of its reality and carry it with you as naturally as you carry your own name. When you live in the end, you cease to approach your desire as a beggar. You no longer say, "One day I will have this," or "I hope it will come." Instead, you dwell in the certainty that it is already yours. You occupy the position of the fulfilled self and look upon the world from that perspective. This shift is subtle yet powerful, for life always reflects the state of consciousness you assume. To live in the end is to live as if the wish has already taken form, and in doing so, you compel the outer world to follow suit. Many people unknowingly live in the means rather than the end. They imagine the process of getting what they want, the steps, the struggles, the waiting, and the delays. But to imagine the process is to dwell in incompletion, and incompletion reproduces itself. Living in the end bypasses all process. It assumes the desire fulfilled now and leaves the details of its unfolding to the greater power of imagination. The seed does not worry about how it will become a tree. It simply contains the end within itself. So too does your asattu, the certainty of its own fulfillment. The practice is simple but demands faith. Close your eyes to the world as it appears, and inwardly feel yourself already in possession of the desired state. If you seek companionship, you imagine yourself already in the joy of relationship. If you seek freedom, you feel the ease of one who is already liberated. If you seek success, you embody the confidence of one who has already attained. The feeling is a secret, is the substance of the end itself. By sustaining it, you dwell as a reality you have chosen. Skeptics may say that such imagining is delusion, that it ignores the hard facts of life. Yet what are facts but past imaginal activity objectified? To cling to them is to bind yourself to yesterday's creation. Living in the end frees you from the tyranny of appearances. You cease to be a prisoner of the senses, and instead become the master who calls into being what is not yet seen. The outer world resists at first, but persistence in the end state bends it into alignment. Living in the end does not mean idle daydreaming. It is not a casual wish entertained for a moment and forgotten. It is an active assumption, a dwelling place for the mind and heart. You return to it again and again, especially when the senses tempt you to doubt. You saturate your inner conversations with it. You move through daily life with it as your secret reality. Gradually, the feeling of the end becomes natural, and when it feels natural, it inevitably hardens into fact. One of the most effective ways to live in the end is to construct imaginal scenes that imply fulfillment. Rather than imagining the event itself, imagine the afterglow of its accomplishment. If your desire is to have achieved something remarkable, imagine a friend congratulating you. or see yourself reflecting upon it with gratitude. These scenes, though brief, carry the implication that the end is already realized. By replaying them in imagination until they feel vivid and real, you enter into the atmosphere of fulfillment. The discipline lies in persistence. The outer world may continue to show the opposite for a time, for it is but the echo of past states. If you judge by appearances, you will abandon your assumption. But if you remain loyal to the unseen reality, within the outer world must eventually conform. Faith is loyalty to the end you have assumed, even when all evidence contradicts it. Living in the end also requires detachment from the heart. The mind loves to interfere, to calculate, to dictate the means by which the desire must arrive. But the end contains within itself the creative force to manifest. When you insist on the how, you block the natural flow. Living in the end releases the burden of means and rests in assurance that the state assumed is the state expressed. Consider how naturally you already live at ends when it comes to your identity. You do not wake each morning doubting whether you are who you know yourself to be. You do not need proof that you are your name, your role, or your history. You simply accept it. So too must you accept the desired state. You carry it with certainty, without strain or effort, because you have already claimed it as your reality. This practice transforms not only circumstances, but also self. To live in the end is to rise to a new level of being. You cannot dwell in the consciousness of wealth without becoming one who thinks and feels as wealthy. You cannot assume health without shedding the identity of the sick. You cannot persist in love without becoming the one who is already loved. The end reshapes the self, and the reshaped self produces a reshaped world. To live in the end is to live from fulfillment rather than toward it. It is to stand at the destination while others still walk the road. It is to hold within you the completed picture and to let the world rearrange itself accordingly. It is the art of claiming your desire now, not by grasping outwardly, but by assuming inwardly that it already is. Consciousness creates reality. The state you occupy determines the life you experience. To understand this truth is to unlock the foundation of all transformation. What you call reality is not something fixed, external, or independent of you. It is the outpicturing of your inner state, the projection of the consciousness you habitually dwell in. Everything you encounter, whether it appears as blessing or burden, is but the reflection of the state you occupy. Change the state, and you change the reflection. Remain in the same state, and life continues to echo it without fade. A state is more than a passing mood or fleeting thought. It is the underlying attitude of being that shapes perception, emotion, and expectation. To occupy a state is to wear invisible clothing that determines how you see yourself, how you interpret the actions of others, and how the world responds to you. The person who dwells in the state of failure sees opportunities as threats, interprets delays as proof of inadequacy, and finds confirmation of defeat everywhere. The person who occupies the state of success, even in the same conditions, sees possibilities, interprets setbacks as stepping stones, and finds confirmation of triumph at every turn. The outer world has not changed. Only the state within has shifted, yet the experience of life is entirely transformed. When we say consciousness creates reality, we mean that the invisible realm of assumption, belief, and inner awareness gives birth to visible conditions. The outer is not primary, but secondary. It is the shadow cast by the inner light. To treat the shadow as cause is to live in ignorance and frustration. To recognize the light of consciousness as cause is to step into mastery. Every desire you hold is already a state of consciousness waiting to be occupied. If you long for wealth, you must not only dream of it, but move into the state of one who is already wealthy. If you desire love, you must dwell in the state of one who is already cherished and valued. To remain in longing is to perpetuate absence. To shift into the state of fulfillment is to call forth its expression in your world. States are like rooms in a vast house. You may enter any at will, and once inside, everything you perceive corresponds to the room you inhabit. The difficulty arises because most live unconsciously in their states. They believe circumstances dictate their feelings, when in truth their chosen state dictates their circumstances. They react to appearances, reinforcing the very sting wish to escape. If they feel poor, they interpret every bill as proof of poverty. If they feel lonely, every silence becomes evidence of abandonment. Yet these are not facts but reflections of an assumed state. The secret lies in detaching from appearances and deliberately occupying the state desired. How is this done? Through imagination, feeling, and persistence. You close your eyes to the evidence of the senses and inwardly assume the mood that would be yours if your desire were already fulfilled. You live from the end rather than toward it. By repeating this inward act, by saturating the self in the feeling of the chosen state, you shift consciousness. As the state becomes natural, the outer world adjusts to mirror it. This is not mere fantasy but law. The subconscious mind, which shapes reality, accepts the state impressed upon it. It does not question whether it is true or false, possible or impossible. It simply reproduces in form what it has received in feeling. To dwell in the state of wealth impresses wealth. To dwell in the state of health impresses health. To dwell in fear impresses calamity. The law is impartial. It delivers to each according to the state he occupies. Notice how easily this operates in daily life. When you wake in a foul mood, the world seems hostile. People appear rude, circumstances frustrating, and events unfavorable. When you wake in joy, the world seems brighter. People are kinder, opportunities arise, and life flows smoothly. Did the world itself change? No. The state you occupied determined the experience. Expand this beyond a day, and you will see how entire lifetimes are shaped by the states one chooses, whether consciously or unconsciously. Consciousness creates reality also explains why effort without inner shift often fails. You may struggle, toil, and labor outwardly, but inwardly you remain in the state of lack. Your results will at lack. You may grasp at love, but if inwardly you dwell in unworthiness, your efforts will be fruitless. The state precedes the event. True change requires not more action, but a new state of being. Occupy the state, and the actions that correspond to it will arise naturally and effectively. This principle is not bound by logic or limitation. To the rational mind, it may seem absurd to assume fulfillment in the face of contradiction. Yet it is precisely this assumption that reshapes reality. When you dare to live as though it were already so, you call forth unseen forces that align circumstances, people, and events to support your state. The world bends not to effort but to assumption. Consciousness is infinite in possibility. At every moment, countless states exist, waiting for you to enter. You may step out of one and into another with nothing more than a shift in feeling and belief. The poor may enter wealth. The lonely may enter love. The sick may enter health. No external permission is required. The gate is imagination, and the key is assumption. Understand then that life is not happening to you. The state you occupy now is the seed of tomorrow's experience. To change the future, you must change the state in the present. Choose deliberately where you dwell in consciousness, for that choice will be clothed in flesh and circumstance. The state you occupy determines the life you're in. Faith is loyalty to unseen reality. Belief is not hope, but the acceptance that it already is. Faith is not a fragile wish for things to improve, nor is it the trembling hope that someday circumstances will align in your favor. Faith is loyalty, steadfastness, an unwavering commitment to an unseen reality that you have already claimed within yourself. It is the choice to accept as true what the senses deny, to stand in the conviction that the invisible is more real than the visible. Where hope looks forward with uncertainty, faith rests now in certainty. It declares, it is so, even when appearances shout otherwise. To understand faith, you must see it as an act of consciousness, rather than a response to evidence. The world insists that facts are final, that only what can be touched or measured is real. But faith disregards such limitation. It knows that the visible is but the outpicturing of the invisible, that the outer is shaped by the inner. Therefore, to cling to appearances is to remain bound to the past, but to accept the unseen as present reality is to step into creation. Faith requires imagination. It asks you to see with the inner eye, what the outer eye cannot yet behold. When you accept within yourself the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you are practicing faith. You are declaring loyalty to the unseen reality of your desire. You do not merely hope it will arrive, you know it is already here, clothed invisibly, awaiting manifestation. This is not self-deception, but alignment with the deeper law of being that assumption, held faithfully, becomes fact. Consider how faith operates in daily life. When you plant a seed, you do not hope it might grow. You know it contains within itself the power to become a tree. You water it, you nurture, and you wait in confidence. You do not dig it up each morning to check whether it is sprouting. Your faith is loyal to the unseen process already underway. So too with the desires of the heart, once planted in imagination. They must be held in faith. They already are, though not yet visible to the senses. To live by faith is to ignore appearances that contradict your assumption. The senses may scream of lack, failure, or delay, but faith remains loyal to fulfillment. It refuses to be swayed by temporary shadows. Faith knows that appearances are but the residue of past states, and by holding firm to the unseen reality, it allows the new state to emerge. This steadfastness distinguishes faith from hope. Hope wavers when appearances deny it. Faith stands unmoved, because it has already accepted the unseen as fact. Faith is also practical. It does not sit idly, waiting for something external to happen. It acts in accordance with its conviction. One who has faith in their reality will carry themselves differently, speak differently, and live differently. Their behavior naturally aligns with the state they have assumed. If you have faith that you are already successful, you will think, feel, and act as one who is successful even before the world acknowledges it. If you have faith in love, you will carry the dignity and joy of one who is already cherished, and soon the world will reflect that state. True faith cannot be forced, it must be chosen and cultivated. It grows through practice, through the repeated act of assuming and persisting in the unseen. Each time you remain loyal to your inner reality in the face of outer contradiction, your faith deepens. You begin to realize that the unseen governs the seen, and that loyalty to the unseen eventually transforms the seen. This realization builds unshakable confidence. Faith is not blind, it sees more clearly than sight. Sight shows you only what has already been created, but faith perceives what is coming into being. Sight is bound by time, faith transcends it. When you walk by faith, you are not deceived by delay, for you know that unseen reality is as present now, as it will be when it appears in form. You rest in the assurance that what you have assumed in consciousness is already yours. This loyalty to unseen reality is the essence of creation. Without it, imagination is weak, scattered, and easily dismissed. With it, imagination becomes power, direction, and certainty. Faith gives weight to your assumptions, making them more than fleeting daydreams. It anchors them in the depth of being, where they are impressed upon the subconscious and expressed in the outer world. Notice how faith is always operated in your life. Every achievement you have ever experienced was preceded by faith. Before the outer evidence appeared, you accepted some inner reality, consciously or unconsciously, that prepared the way. Even in simple acts like sitting in a chair, faith is present. You do not hope it will hold you, you accept its strength without question. If such loyalty is given to objects, how much more must it be given to the unseen states of consciousness that shape destiny? Faith demands persistence. To be loyal is not to entertain an assumption for a moment, and then abandon it at the first challenge. Loyalty implies constancy. It means holding fast to the end you have assumed, even when the outer world delays its confirmation. Persistence is not struggle, it is quiet certainty, the steady refusal to betray your inner reality. This persistence, born of loyalty, eventually compels the outer to conform. Faith as loyalty to unseen reality is not about striving to believe harder, but about resting in the acceptance that it already is. It is not waiting, but knowing. It is not hoping, but embodying. It is the shift from desire to fulfillment, from longing to possession. In this shift lies the power to remake your world. For the unseen you accept today comes the scene you live tomorrow, detachment from appearances, Do not be swayed by present conditions. They are shadows of former states. Every visible condition in your world is nothing more than the echo of what you once assumed within. What stands before your senses today is not the true reality, but the hardened form of imaginal activity already spent. To mistake it for the source of power is to remain bound by effects. To understand it as shadow is to reclaim freedom. The wise do not allow appearances to dictate their mood, expectation, or state of being. They know that what is seen is already past, and that the living cause of tomorrow's experience lies within imagination now. Detachment from appearances is not indifference, nor is it denial. It is recognition that the outer world is secondary, an afterimage, just as the reflection in a mirror cannot change until the original face changes. The world cannot alter until consciousness shifts. The unawakened cling to the mirror, polishing and reshaping the reflection, but the awakened know to turn inward, where true alteration occurs. Appearances may shout of limitation, but to dwell in them is to perpetuate them. Detachment allows you to withdraw power from what was and invest it in what shall be. Present conditions often carry an air of authority. They claim permanence. They insist that what you see is final. But appearances are deceptive. They are simply the outpicturing of a prior state, the residue of yesterday's imaginal acts. If you permit yourself to be impressed by them, you bind yourself to their continuation. To detach is to rise above their seeming finality. To remember that life is always flowing, reshaping, and reorganizing itself according to the state you now occupy. Detachment requires discipline of attention. The senses tempt you to believe in lack, illness, failure, or rejection, for they parade these before you as undeniable facts. Yet what you attend to inwardly is what you fertilize. To attend to appearances is to water old seeds. To attend instead to the desired state is to plant anew. Detachment is the refusal to let appearances dominate your inner conversations. It is the decision to look beyond reality. You are choosing in imagination. This principle can be seen in the simplest of examples. A letter arrives with troubling news. If you accept it as final, you react with fear, anger, or despair. Yet the letter is but the physical residue of an earlier assumption, your own or another's. To detach from it is to refuse to let it govern your state. You may acknowledge it, but you do not surrender to it. Instead, you turn inward and construct a new imaginal act. The scene you would encounter at the situation were already resolved in your favor. You dwell in that end, and soon the outer must shift to reflect it. The letter was a shadow, the inner act is the substance. Detachment also means living in faith rather than sight. Sight shows you what has been. Faith shows you what is becoming. To cling to sight is to remain trapped in cycles. To walk by faith is to break them. Faith is loyalty to the unseen, and detachment is its necessary companion. Without detachment from appearances, faith collapses into doubt. But with detachment, faith is free to persist until fulfillment arrives. To practice detachment is to train yourself to feel more deeply the inner reality than the outer condition. If the outer shows illness, you detach by refusing to identify with it. You imagine health and well in the feeling of vitality. If the outer shows poverty, you detach by deciding to call yourself poor. You assume the state of abundance, regardless of bank balances or bills. The outer will resist at first, for shadows linger, but persistence in a new state compels eventual change. Detachment is not cold withdrawal, but creative mastery. You do not ignore life, but you interpret it differently. You see appearances as effects, not causes. You respond to them not with panic, but with calm recognition that a new cause may be found within. This calm is strength. It is the refusal to be tossed about by every gust of circumstance. It is the poise of one who knows that imagination is sovereign. The world becomes a classroom in which detachment is tested. Each appearance that contradicts your desire is an invitation to practice. Will you be swayed by what you see, or will you remain loyal to what you have assumed within? Each trial strengthens your mastery. Each victory deepens your appearances are powerless without your consent. The greatest trap is emotional entanglement with appearances. When you identify with them, you fuse your being with their message. You feel lack, you feel sickness, you feel despair, and by feeling, you recreate them. Detachment severs this fusion. It does not deny the sensation of the moment, but it refuses to grant it permanence. You acknowledge the appearance as passing, and you shift your inner attention to the state desired. In this way, you break the cycle and introduce a new creation. Remember that appearances always lag behind assumption. They are delayed echoes. What you see now was impressed yesterday. What you impress now will appear tomorrow. Detachment allows you to live in this knowledge, to endure the lag without surrendering to it. You know that the outer must eventually conform, so you hold steadfast in the unseen. Detachment from appearances is therefore not an escape from life, but the secret of shaping it. By refusing to be hypnotized by shadows, you free yourself to choose the reality you wish to experience. By declining to give power to what is already spent, you invest all power in the state that to come. The shadow fades, the new state emerges, and life reveals itself as nothing more than imagination, externalized transformation of self to change circumstances. One must first change the image is being. Every outer circumstance you encounter is the reflection of an inner state already assumed. Life does not happen to you independently of your own consciousness. It happens through you, echoing the condition of being you inhabit. Many attempt to alter the world by rearranging outer events, people, and conditions, yet such efforts are temporary at best, for the root remains unchanged. The only lasting transformation comes when the inner self shifts. Change the state of consciousness, and the world must realign to mirror it. The self is not the body, nor the name, nor the roles you play in society. The self is the sum of your assumptions, your beliefs, your attitudes toward life and toward yourself. It is the unseen pattern you carry within, and this pattern shapes every experience. If you regard yourself as unworthy, you will live in circumstances that reflect rejection and lack. If you assume yourself capable and valued, you will encounter opportunities and relationships that affirm your worth. To transform self is to deliberately revise this inner pattern, to choose a new state from which you live. Circumstances are stubborn only when you regard them as primary. They dissolve when you recognize them as effects. The sick person who remains identified with sickness, even while pursuing treatment, continues to produce sickness because the state is unchanged. The poor person who thinks continually of poverty, even while laboring tirelessly, perpetuates lack because the state is unchanged. But the moment one abandons the old state and assumes a new identity inwardly, the circumstances inevitably shift to match. Transformation of self precedes transformation of life. This principle explains why resolutions, efforts, and struggles often fail. Without a change in being, actions are only surface alterations. A man may attempt to be generous while inwardly clinging to a state of scarcity. His giving will be strained and fearful, and soon lack returns. Another may attempt to appear confident while secretly feeling insecure. His outer performance crumbles because the state does not support it. Authentic transformation begins not with action, but with assumption. When the state is altered, actions flow naturally, effortlessly, and effectively from the new being. To change the inner state, one must use imagination consciously. You do not fight the old state. You simply replace it by assuming the new. This is done by entering into the feeling of the wish fulfilled, by experiencing inwardly the reality you desire as though it were already yours. If you would be healthy, you imagine the ease and vitality of health. If you would be wealthy, you imagine the freedom and joy of abundance. If you would be loved, you imagine the warmth and security of companionship. By dwelling in these feelings, you shift your state of being, and the outer world must eventually reflect this shift. Transformation of self requires persistence. The old state will attempt to reassert itself, for appearances are delayed echoes of prior assumptions. The outer world may continue for a time to display the fruit of the old state, and if you identify with it, you return to the former self. But if you remain steadfast in the new assumption, ignoring appearances and holding loyalty to the unseen, the outer world will yield. Transformation is tested in these moments of contradiction. The one who endures, who continues to occupy the new state despite appearances, proves its reality. This inner transformation is not achieved by force but by acceptance. You do not strain to become. You simply accept that you already are. You claim within yourself the identity of the fulfilled state. And in that acceptance lies the power of change. Just as a seed accepts itself as a tree and grows into it, so too does the self grow into whatever identity it assumes. Transformation is therefore not a battle, but a surrender to the truth you choose to embody. Transformation of self also reveals that others are not the cause of your experience. They are instruments reflecting your own state back to you. To blame them is to miss the lesson. To transform self is to see them change accordingly. The critic disappears when you no longer carry self-condemnation. The harsh world softens when you no longer dwell in fear. The supportive friend appears when you have assumed the state of being worthy of love. By altering self, you alter the roles others play in their life. The inner state is a magnetic field. It draws to itself the conditions, events, and people that correspond to it. To transform self is to alter this magnetism. It is not necessary to chase opportunities or manipulate people. They are drawn naturally to the new state. The world is compelled to rearrange itself in obedience to the transformation within. This transformation is ongoing, for life continually offers new desires, new visions of self. Each desire is a call to rise, an invitation to embody a higher state being. To resist is to stagnate, to accept is to evolve. Thus, every longing you feel is not a reminder of lack, but a pointer toward a greater version of self waiting to be assumed. The true work of life, then, is the transformation of self. It is the continual revision of the inner pattern, the deliberate choice of states that reflect the fullness of being you wish to experience. By mastering this inner shift, you free yourself from the tyranny of circumstances and assume your rightful place as creator of your world. Every change in the outer is preceded by a change in the inner. Every new condition arises from a new state of being. Transformation of self is the key to transformation of life that, my friends, is the art of living in the end.